find a way to address just a fraction of those problems, we will be making a material difference. The good news is that we've already started this journey. If you go back 25 years to when the first chaos report came out in 1994, 95, somewhere there, the challenge projects were about where they are today, but the successful projects were about a third, and the failed projects about 2/3 of the remaining 50%. So, and I think, and I'm speculating, that our improvement over this period has possibly been because of the application in the industry of some of the tools and techniques that we'll be discussing today. And that's why I'm so excited about being here today. I know that we can and will make a difference. So welcome. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for putting the next 4 hours of your day on hold. And thank you for agreeing to be part of this journey that we can start improving the stats around our project. So I don't think that there can be a more important topic in the IT project space than what we are about to get our teeth into. So the nature of the day that we're going to have today is there's going to be a lot of me on the screen, I'm afraid. It's pretty much a one-way form of communication, but I've structured it in such a way to make it as interactive as we can. And so what we need to do is balance a mountain of information on the one hand with exercises, polls, plus checks, question and answers, and of course, and probably most importantly, the group chat. So you'll get far more from today if you pick up your pen, if you do engage on the chat and with me during the Q&A widget. And feel free to talk to each other as well, share your feelings and opinions about what's going down. We've got a number of exercises which you'll be doing on your own to practice some of the tools and techniques that we'll be discussing. So please have a pen and notepaper handy. As I said, we're going to use the chat quite a bit, but if you've got a specific question that's about the material that we're talking about that you would like me to address, please use the Q&A widget. That way they won't get lost in the chat. So, are you up for an adventure? If so, fasten your seatbelt and let's get started. In fact, I would like you to start by setting your expectation and intention of what you would like to achieve in this session. So grab a piece of paper and say, my expectation or my intention for this course, whichever word you choose, is to. And make a note about if you close your laptop at the end of the session in 3.5, 4 hours time, and you said to yourself, that was a great session, I got just what I wanted. What would you have that you don't have right now? So take a moment to make that note. If you'd like to share it on the chat, you're very welcome to, but not if you don't want to. It is, this is for you. And while you're doing that, I'll just give you a little bit of a heads up what to expect over the next 5 or 10 minutes. We know that projects operate in an unbelievably uncertain environment. And so we're just going to touch on why that is, at least some of the factors that make that true. We also know that planning and project planning in particular, because of that uncertainty, is difficult. And we're going to touch on that. And then I'm going to finish off this first segment by introducing you to a very high level, very simple structure of how to approach risk management on your projects. And in fact, that's going to be our roadmap for the majority of this course moving forward. So finish off that risk, and we will start talking about our project environment in just a moment. Right, let's talk about projects. What is a project? A project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to develop a unique product or service. Now, of course, this is just one of many definitions, depending on the authors concerned, but most of them wouldn't disagree dramatically with this definition. It has the key ingredients as to what makes a project a project. And really, if you have a look at what distinguishes projects from other professional endeavors, it is those two adjectives there. Projects are temporary, and they result in a unique product or service. So let's use those two adjectives to open up the discussion about project uncertainty. So the first one is temporary. Projects are temporary. What does that mean? It means there's a time when the project does not exist, then it gets initiated, and it does exist, it comes into existence, and then it completes and ceases to exist. So the implication of that temporary nature are at least twofold. If the first one is this, if the if the project is temporary, that means that the project organization is temporary. That means your project team needs to come together at the beginning of the project when they've never worked together. So you've got issues of team cohesion, team maturity, and so we need to start working through the forming, storming, norming, performing stages of team development before we can hit our paces in terms of team effectiveness. That's the first thing. The second thing is related to that, and that is that people come into project teams often from different disciplines. So, for example, it's not unusual to have on a project team 4 different disciplines from within the digital or IT space, along with somebody from marketing, finance, legal maybe, and so on. So you get people coming onto your project team who are not there permanently, who possibly are there on a part-time basis as well. So they've still got other responsibilities from where their line priority is. And so they are juggling, trying to fit in our project requirements of them with their normal responsibility. And of course, one has to say, where does their loyalty lie? It has to lie with their line responsibility because that's where their pay comes from. So there's a huge amount of uncertainty just from the fact that projects, by their very nature, are temporary. They also, as we said earlier, produce a unique product or service. And that means that we might have built many bridges before, many billing systems before, many apps before, but we've never done this particular one before. And so each one has different requirements, specific environments, different role players. And so while we might have built bridges like this before, we haven't built this bridge or this house or this dam or this app. And so there is more uncertainty coming because we've never done this exact thing before. Unlike people who work in a process environment who have high levels of repeatability. The third one, as we alluded to a little bit earlier, is that projects are agents of change. We spoke about innovation, disruption, inventions, implementation of strategic intent. And so we are guiding the organization, we're facilitating the movement of our organization to move from where we are today, which we understand, we know it, we own it, to an uncertain future. And so change always carries uncertainty. And projects are agents of change. The next one is our projects are increasing dramatically in terms of complexity. When I started out, it was so much easier. We had to computerize manual processes. It wasn't difficult. These days, we are orders of magnitude more complex. We disrupt entire industries and create new ones. And it's getting faster and faster, with technologies becoming ever more sophisticated. Let me give you an example. This whole course, with its lecture notes, with its visuals, with its examples, its exercises, was authored this morning in 8.73 seconds by ChatGPT. No, it wasn't really, but you know what I'm saying. Things are moving fast. We've just got to do something about the presenter now. And in a similar vein, those of us who work in the digital world, the non-physical world, have a much harder time in pinning things down than the hard hat environment, where there is far less uncertainty, because if you're building a house, if you're building a dam, you are constrained by the laws of physics. It might be hard to calculate, but there's finite and precise quantities about how much concrete it takes to build a dam wall to a certain specification, how many bricks it takes to build a wall of a certain specification. And so the hard hat environment that I call it, the construction environment, the built environment, has far less uncertainty than we do. Our world, the non-physical world, has no such restrictions. The mind can model reality and fantasy with equal ease. And it's possible that fantastical ideas may even be implementable and are great things to do. But we don't have a language to model solutions the way that civil engineers do. We rely on English descriptions where a stakeholder said, this is my vision, this is what I want to do. And the only way to test it is to go away and build it. And when it doesn't work, when it's not what we want, then we've got to build it again. That would be a very expensive way to build dams, and it is a very expensive way for us to build IT systems and apps. So here are just 5 factors that make projects inherently uncertain. It's not a bad thing. It is just what it is. And I have no doubt that you could come up with another 5 or even 10 factors that make our world incredibly uncertain. But let's move on now and put a tick next to uncertainty, say it really is, and let's talk about planning. I wonder if you commute to work. Perhaps if you do, then you can visualize what I'm saying right now. I don't, but I used to. And so if you said, well, how long does it take? Well, how long will it take you to get home tonight? I'll say, well, it varies, but normally about 20 minutes, because I was lucky to work just 8 kilometers from home. Call it 20 minutes. Now and again, I might even do it in 15 minutes, particularly when I work late and the afternoon traffic has cleared a bit. And about once a week, I probably work late and I can get home in about 15 minutes. And of course, if I go to work over the weekends, then there's no traffic at all, and I can do it in 10 to 12 minutes, although it can never be quicker than that. But of course, it might also take longer. If there's bad traffic, then it might add 5 or 10 minutes to the journey. And so there are days when it takes 20 minutes. And if I have to stop to pick up groceries or to visit a friend or something, then that adds on another 5 minutes. And if I stop at the drink for stop for a drink with a friend, that could be 40 or 50 minutes. Likewise, a workout at the gym. And it's possible, sadly, albeit very unlikely, that I might not make it home at all. And so here we're talking about a task that I could perform every working day of my life. And yet I can't predict its duration with confidence because there are various variables involved. So how can we expect to be able to predict project tasks that by definition we haven't done before with any accuracy? And so project plans, at best, are statements about uncertain futures, often massively uncertain futures. So we've got all of this uncertainty around projects. We've got this uncertainty around project planning. So every single task in my project plan is not so much of a duration, but a statistical phenomenon, which says this was the times that I gave you for my journey home on an average week or average month. And that is the picture that is actually inherent in our project plans for every task. And so it's a huge amount of uncertainty, both in the nature of projects and in the nature of plans. So how do we deal with all of this uncertainty? And the answer is that we have a very simple looking process, and it actually is not a difficult process at all. It's a simple, structured approach to identify our risks, to prioritize them, to plan and execute appropriate responses, and to monitor the results. And so this is really our roadmap for the next couple of hours to say, let's go through each of these step by step and see how we can do this, getting in a hands-on way. There's not a lot of theory in this. There is a bit, but actually it's really very much about techniques, tools, tips and traps in terms of how you can make this thing come alive on your project. So let's start off with having a look at your project and say, please write down one risk from your current or a previous project, articulating it clearly so that it is self-explanatory and easily understood by someone else. So I did put words to that effect into the chat before we started, so hopefully you've had a head start on that. Just take a moment to make sure that if I was to pick it up, I should be able to understand a little bit about what's going on with that particular risk and why it is that you're concerned about this issue. Okay, if you haven't finished, don't worry, because you can carry on. I'm sure that you can multitask while we just go on to having a look at risk identification, because that is in fact what you're busy with. So before we go on, are there any specific questions in the chat about this material that you would like me to talk about right now? Please use the Q&A widget if you do. I'm just opening it on my side. Okay, there are a couple of comments. There's a couple of comments here and one question which we haven't spoken about. I'll come back to that if we get a moment later. So what I'm going to do is let's go on and say, let's talk about first step in our process, which is risk identification. So we've spoken at length about uncertainty, and I can't stress it enough, obviously. The question I've got for you is, does uncertainty equal risk? Is it the same thing? Are they synonyms for the same thing? What do you think? Well, perhaps I can ask you another question which might take us there. And the question is this: will it rain in London next week? And we're going to have a little survey so that I can get your opinion as to whether it will rain in London next week. So if you can please, let's open up. Maybe push this to the audience. And tell me what you think. Is your answer yes, no, probably, possibly, we don't know, or who cares? So I'll give you a minute for that. What he said is, let's adapt the SWOT, let's use the SWOT structure, but adapt it specifically to what it is that we're trying to do. And so he defines strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in very clear terms. So starting with the strength, he says that's a characteristic, resource, or capacity that helps us to achieve project objectives. That's a strength. So it's taking us in the direction of achieving our project objectives. A weakness, on the other hand, is a limitation or fault or defects that hinders achievement of project objectives. So we've got strengths and weaknesses, and they were talking about ourselves within our environment, be it the project team, the project organizational environment, or the broader organization, even the industry. So what is it that we have within our environment which are strengths, and what is it that we have within our environment which are weaknesses? And then opportunities are potential favorable things that might positively affect the project. And threats are positively unfavorable situations that might negatively affect the project. So with those definitions in mind, he's basically saying, okay, let's relate them. Let's navigate and say, we have these strengths. Based on those strengths, we could possibly get opportunities. Those are uncertain events or conditions that, if they were to occur, may have a positive effect on our project's outcome, project's objectives. And likewise, on the right-hand side, weaknesses. Because of a weakness, we might be able to identify a few more threats. Those are negative uncertainties. And guess what? He still uses the meta language, albeit with an adaptation. We say, because we have a particular strength, so this could be our opinion, but we're not arguing about it. It's almost like a fact. Because we have the strength, it is possible that we may be able to gain an uncertain event or condition that would represent a positive effect on our objectives. And on the other side, we could say, because we have a weakness that we acknowledge, it is possible that we could be vulnerable to a threat, which could lead to negative effects on objectives. So let's look at an example or two. Because we have, and I've kept to the same color coding, because we have concluded the gateway software acquisition, it is possible that we may be able to gain additional coding capacity, which could lead to fast-tracking our app development. So because something's happened, we've acquired a software company that may give us additional capacity. We're not sure, but if it did, we could fast-track our app development. Or because we have to replace our Python developer, it is possible that we could be vulnerable to a possible delay in that section of the code, because we don't know how long it's going to take to replace that developer, which could lead to delayed delivery of the prototype. So that is a way in which we could perhaps make our articulation of opportunities, in other words, upside risks, positive risks, a bit easier to say, well, let's think about strengths that we've got in the environment and think, how might we deploy those? So bear that in mind. We also have constraints with our environment, and we make assumptions that are typically expressed as positive assumptions. And so, again, we speculate. In this case, we start with the word if, but if we could remove or relax a constraint that we know that we've got, like our budget, for example. But if we could remove or relax that constraint, it is possible that we may be able to gain an opportunity, which could lead to a positive effect or positive effects on objectives. And if the positive assumption that we've made, we have sufficient resources, proves false, we get an exodus from our team. It is possible that we would be vulnerable to a threat, which could lead to negative effects on objectives. So these are variations on the meta language, which allow us to go to our documentation, to our SWOT analysis, to our constraints, to our assumptions, and say, let's see if we can surface more threats and opportunities in identifying a comprehensive set of project risks. So, example, if we could relax the policy of using local suppliers, it is possible that we may be able to gain alternative suppliers of key components, which could lead to quicker time to market. Or if our assumption is that we can base our sales forecasts on the survey results proves incorrect, it is possible that we could be vulnerable to weaker sales, which could lead to negative cash flow and overstocking of ready-to-ship product. This last one was based on a true situation with a micro brewer, a craft beer brewer, who they did a whole bunch of sales market research, and they said, wow, these sales are looking fabulous, but they were also very worried that if they produced prior to launch too much of their craft beer, they would have huge cash flow and overstocking problems. So it's now your turn again. Write down a strength, real or imagined, of your team and or your project environment, and think about an opportunity that could materialize based on that strength, and write it down using the meta language. There it is. The structure is at the bottom of the slide. Okay, a couple of minutes for that. See how you do. Start with the strength, work from there. Okay, so that is really the tools that you have at your disposal when you are identifying and articulating risks. So I'm going to end this segment with a very quick overview about how do we use it. And our very strong advice to you is don't try and do it as an individual. You want to do it with stakeholders, people who understand your environment, the issues, and there are many reasons for this, including shared ownership, more people thinking about it, many brains better than one, and so on. So you really want to have risk identification workshops. And what we found, by the way, is that our risk identification workshops are incredibly engaging. People really get, particularly using the meta language, they argue about what is that really an objective, or I didn't know that had already happened, and so on. Or they might say, oh, yes, I see that because of that cause, there's a risk that you are worried about, but for the same reason, I'm worried about a different risk. And so these workshops can be incredibly engaging, albeit time-consuming. So you might, for example, if you look on the top left of that picture, use brainstorming. In fact, what you might typically do is get brainstorming for momentum and creativity, and then switch to the meta language for structure and discipline. So you can have different approaches to your workshops. You might have, it's very important to go through all your documents. So as your project is producing documents, be it specifications, plans, reviews, whatever it is, you want to have somebody looking at those documents and saying, where are the risks here? For example, your work breakdown structure, your task list, whatever name you give it, has a whole bunch of tasks in there, each one of them potentially having uncertainty, if you remember our commuting example right at the beginning. So in your schedule specifies what must happen, what you're planning to happen, but you need for each part of that plan to say what might happen. And likewise, to the right there, you see that your SWOT analysis. We've spoken about that. On the left-hand side, we spoke about constraints and assumptions analysis, and a very useful way of identifying risks. You've got external dependencies, a very, very risky area. And then that leads us into checklists. There are ways in which you can steal checklists or you can create them. A very, very useful example of a risk-oriented checklist is the risk breakdown structure. You see that bottom right. So let's have a look at an example of a risk breakdown structure. What you do is you sit with your team at the beginning of the project, and we'll come back to this at the end of our time together later, and say, what are the categories of risk that we are likely to see here? And then you can have risk subcategories so that you can see that we've got requirements is a clear source of risk, particularly, as we were saying earlier, in the digital space. And so what are the categories there? Incomplete requirements, changing requirements, inconsistent requirements, things that don't fit together, untested requirements. Oh, that might be a good idea, but have we done any market research? And so on. And so the risk breakdown structure is a very, very useful tool to have. And you go and do a search, you'll find plenty of them online. Which brings us, folk, to your questions and our first break. So I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes now, and we'll take a 10 minutes break. When we come back, we'll have a quick look at your questions, please, just relating